Hello, I'm Joshua Crocker.
And I'm Kevin Liston.
And this is Kicking for a Living,
a podcast about martial arts and business from two martial arts instructors.
Alright, so we're back for another episode. I think we're on to episode 11 overall, so in double digits now.
One over double digits.
One over. How are things going?
So far, so good. It's been going really good. I know we had a busy black belt training week. That was a lot of fun. Guest instructors, coming down. But it's good to get back into a normal routine a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like this week, as we're kind of getting it back on track, has been good. Usually the first couple weeks after a big event are also busy because you're catching up from being busy during the event, and then you gotta make up work and all of that. But I think we're back into kind of a normal swing now.
Right. Still lots of stuff going on, but kind of back into the normal teaching schedule routine, normal daily work routine, things of that. So, and it was a little easier to find time to record this one because we didn't have to bounce around all those things. So it's nice. It's nice. It's good to be back.
We're up to now at our dojo, let's see, I think it's 21 active black belts, and I think closer to 30 total who have, trained here. I ran the numbers a few weeks ago. I think we've had 28 people participate in a black belt testing, as we talked about close to a month ago. So we've had a lot of different black belts come through our dojo. We've seen different people backgrounds. People who came to us as white belts, people who've come to us as black belts from another school. So we've had a good mix of people we've trained with here over the years.
Yeah, I think it's really nice, but it's also important to have that kind of experience where not every black belt has been start to finish with just us. Some of them have done training at another school and then came over here and things like that. But I think it's hard, but I also think it's good to have that kind of a mix. I think it keeps us on our toes too.
So a question I have, though, about that is, black belt's a pretty common term thrown around and a pretty common rank associated with martial arts. That, if you watch any media about martial arts, maybe it's a episode of a sitcom or cartoon and they have the martial arts episode. They'll probably make a few jokes about someone being a black belt. How do you see it with the people you've trained with over the years and some of the difference in black belts versus how maybe it's perceived?
So this will segue really well into what we're going to talk about, but I think a big thing is a black belt in martial art is very dependent on the style of martial art. From what I've seen, there is a huge difference between a Taekwondo black belt versus a karate black belt versus a jiu-jitsu black belt, etc., and so on and so forth. But even still, like that black belt, like you said, is kind of that pinnacle. It's what everyone wants to go to, which, yes, but that's not always the case. Because if someone gets their black belt in 5 years, it's very different than someone who got their black belt in 20 years. But it's still that black belt. I'm making quotations with my fingers that y'all can't see yet.
So then tell us right now, what is the appropriate amount of time to earn a black belt?
I think it depends on the style. But if I had to just ballpark it, I would say at least 5 years. I think before that is too soon. I would say probably the long end is 10 plus years to earn a black belt. And I will also qualify, that's dedicated training. That is dedicated on the mat training. Minimum of 5. If you're going over 10, you're probably not dedicated training. So somewhere within that gap, I would say is pretty reasonable. I think that's fair. I don't know. Do you agree? Disagree? Yeah,
I think that's fair. I was just throwing that at you, see what you would respond with. Again, you say it's different in each style, so there doesn't need to be a correct answer. But I think 5 to 10 is pretty good. If it's less than 5, then someone's usually not maybe ready for that top level. If you think about anything, any field, any activity, it always takes 5+ years almost to, again, quotation marks, but master something. If someone goes to school, 5 years, they get their degree and then often go to graduate school. It can take 6+ years, depending on what your field is, to get through just school for any other field. I think it's kind of the same thing here. It can take around the same amount of time to get to that black belt level.
And I think that's kind of the goal is, when you're talking about college, the idea of 4 years, really, that's not going to give you a master's or a PhD or doctorate, unless you are really, really, really exceptional. So that 5 years, some people it might take 10. It depends on obviously the field that you're going for, but it's kind of the same. I think for a black belt, if you're going to call it a school, it should be treated like a school. Mm-hmm. Some places even call it a university, the Gracie University. It's a school. So it follows a similar pattern and rule set.
Yeah, and I think going off of the 10+ you're talking about, there's not a whole lot of schools where you'll see it takes longer. I think it's more common in maybe jiu-jitsu, as far as I'm aware.
They're at the 10-year mark. There's maybe a few that get it in 9. There's some that take a little longer, but that's also why I said dedicated training. I've been training jiu-jitsu, but I've also been training other things. Yeah. So,
but I feel like if it is dedicated training and it takes you more than 10 years for your students to get a black belt, that starts to get to the point where it feels a little too long, like you're maybe holding off someone who is ready for that rank. But again, that comes down to expectations. What do you expect out of your black belts? Mm-hmm. If anyone's committed to something, dedicated, been doing it for a decade, I think that's usually a good indicator that they're ready.
Right.
At the least.
Yeah, if they're not, there's usually something else going on.
I mean, last week we talked a lot about adaptive martial arts and all the things that go into that. So there's a few different things that could speed that up or slow down your progress, but 5 to 10 is usually a good benchmark.
I agree. I think that's a good set number to go with. With that being said, because you mentioned expectations, and we kind of wanted to talk our entire episode is going to be kind of what that black belt means, the myth of the black belt. Because like you said, in media and shows, when you hear, oh, it's a black belt, that's like this great big thing. I'll take Cobra Kai, for example, even Karate Kid, he goes from being a white belt to a black belt. They never show color. It's always you're either a white belt or a black belt. Now, there are other colors in there. For those
that's one of my favorite things about just classes and being on the mats with students is seeing all the different belt ranks. Just someone who really likes things that are aesthetically pleasing, seeing the difference in color, pleases me. Just whether I'm looking back at pictures or whatever, having all the different color belts, uniforms, all that, and get some personality to what's going on rather than just being people in all white or all black. I mean, that's a small thing, just a note I want to shout out. But seeing the different colors out there is one of the cool things, and I think why a lot of schools now do color belts is to track the progress and to feel like you're kind of making it through something. It's your journey to black belt. You get every color along the way. It's kind of a collection.
And I think that it gives people more attainable goals. If you told someone you go to college and you're going to have to train, do this hard and really get all this, and you go straight from no degree to a doctorate with not associates and bachelors and da-da-da. It's those little intermediate goals that give you progress, that you can see progress. It's like building a wall brick by brick. Imagine how tedious it would get if no matter how many bricks you placed down, you never saw progress until it was finished. I guarantee that wall won't get built. People need to see progress.
And I feel like we've talked a bit about some of that progress, and we talked a lot about students on our podcast so far. One area I feel like maybe it's time to turn a little more attention to, though, is what we're getting at in today's episode, is actually being a black belt and the myth of being a black belt, as you bring up in media and all these things. So as we look at our perception of black belts, ourselves, and have an outside view of black belts, what are the different kind of opinions, and where are some maybe the myths that come into play?
Yeah, and I think that because of the media, this idea of what a black belt is, because it does branch out to so many different martial arts, is you get this idea that, oh, you're a black belt, so you're a master. You're the best there can be. Black belts can whoop anybody. And it's just, there's other myths and things associated with it. But it's idea that really at the end of the day, a black belt is just, you didn't give up, you tried hard, and you got good at whatever it is you were doing. But there's this myth that comes with that, which is really funny because you know this, dealing with kids. When they see a black belt, there's this awe, like, oh my gosh. And of course, we look at ourselves and we're like, oh, I'm not anything special.
Yeah, it's easy to forget sometimes with newer students, just the way they see you is a little bit different than the way you see yourself, the other black belts and instructors see you, even the way your more veteran students see you, is that there is kind of they put you up on a pedestal a little bit, so you have to be cautious of that, but also live up to it to an extent. You have to set the example, set the standard that they're here to see, and then over time you build that relationship and it becomes a little bit more even. And I think that's not just with black belts. That can be with any teacher, professor, any instructor, coach is going to have that. It's going to have that over their students, that view.
I think it's also important to note that, yes, black belt, you put a lot of time, you put a lot of effort in. But it's not just about the martial training. You know, there's the respect, the discipline, the integrity, the humility, and all those things. And I think the biggest problem is that, I say this is a problem, it's also a misconception, but it's a problem from my end, is there are a lot of black belts out there that don't have those things. They might be really good fighters, but they don't have good respect. They don't have that good integrity. And I feel like if you're a black belt, you should. Like, you put a lot of work in, it's really hard. You should, as you said, uphold that standard. You should be that good example. And so just when you see a black belt, a person is still a person. They could be a good person, they could be a bad person. Unfortunately, the black belt doesn't always dictate that. It should, but it doesn't.
It brings up another interesting kind of intersection of black belts, is a lot of black belts are considered instructors or coaches or teachers at their school. But I think in especially bigger dojos or maybe more modern times that a black belt and an instructor are not necessarily the same thing. Usually an instructor is a black belt, but a black belt isn't always an instructor. So is there also a difference between maybe those two sides of it?
Oh, absolutely. I was actually having a conversation with one of my coaches the other day, and some of the best competitors are not the best teachers. Honestly, and I think this also applies to any sport. Some of the best coaches were not always the best players. Well, why is that? They struggled. If you struggled and worked hard and it didn't come naturally to you, you have a better understanding of what someone else is going through when they're doing it. But if you're very naturally gifted and you're just, oh, this clicked and I could do this easy, and then when someone else comes up and says, well, I'm struggling with this, you don't know how to help them. And so I've met some of the best teachers were not the highest ranking black belt. Some of them are not even black belts. But there is definitely a difference between being a good teacher versus being a good martial artist. And so I think you're right. Most coaches are black belts because they've at least gotten that far, but not all black belts are going to be teachers. Some of them are there some of them are just there to train.
I'm thinking about, some of the people I've worked with over time here is there are some of our more talented instructors who have just always been really good at this stuff. Sometimes it can be hard to learn from them just because they don't understand what it can be like to not be good at something. I don't know if we've talked about her a lot on the podcast yet. We haven't had her on for an episode. But one of our new instructors of our judo program, Miss Bonnie, I've worked with her a lot, and I feel like I really enjoy being coached by her because I don't think, and she hopefully would admit this, I'm not speaking out of term, when she started was one of the most talented martial artists. It took her a lot of time to build her skill. She started when she was a little older, so because of that, she wasn't, some 14-year-old kid who started and was really talented right away because they were, young and agile, picked up on the stuff when they were little. Instead, when I was able to start kind of this new skill set, she's able to really break it down at a level that even a beginner can understand. I think it helps. She's worked with a lot of kids over the years in teaching, for her own kids. But that's kind of shows that she's a really good teacher, even if, she's also a really talented martial artist, but maybe didn't start that way. That's how I've always felt about myself.
Yeah.
Until I hit about 16, so essentially my first 10 years of martial arts, I was a maybe average kid. You can give a little bit better opinion on that since you were my teacher that time, but I never felt like one of the best kids in class for a while, and until I was already a black belt, essentially. And I felt like that's helped me with teaching because I was a kid who had a short attention span, wasn't able to focus very well all the time. I was flexible, but not, very talented, not very strong, always smaller. So I feel like that helps me relate to students who struggle as well.
Yeah, I absolutely, because I was in a similar boat. I was always smaller. I'm still not very flexible, which has been a huge detriment to a majority of my training.
Especially since you started in Taekwondo, or did it soon after? Yeah.
Well, that was the first one that I got official rank in.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, it was Taekwondo. And that was very difficult when you're not very flexible and you can't do those splits and high-level kicks. But then you have someone like Dan, who is very flexible and just kind of naturally was like, oh, this is how you kick. And then I'm over here like, how long I had to do and work to get that? But there are still other areas that maybe I excelled at that other people didn't. And I think teaching was one of those that I just kind of naturally started clicking and gravitating towards because I could. And same thing with you. We could relate. We could say, oh, man, I understand your struggle. Let me help you out. Oh, I understand this. Let me help you with that. I've been there. Let me help. Bonnie's the same way. Oh, I know how that works. I've had to deal with that. Those are some of the best coaches and instructors because they've been there.
And part of, again, talking about the difference between a black belt and instructor is just kind of the eye you have to have for a lot of it is you have to be able to look at when you're coaching someone, how they're performing, and be able to pick up on those details so quick. And it can be a simple move, but as you watch someone do it, you know all the little pieces to look for. And if they are having a problem with it, you can find kind of the root cause, because if they're doing a kick, the kick is poor, well, that might not be because their kick part was bad, but they had poor balance. So you have to fix the root problem. And I think where a lot of the intersection between these comes with any black belt has been training for a while, and they pick up on a lot of this stuff. Any black belt, is really good at what they do, at a good dojo anyway, so they should be able to teach it. They may not be the best teacher, but they are knowledgeable on the subject matter. And at a lot of schools, they call on their high ranks and black belts to help coach people sometimes. So I think that's where people maybe blur the lines a little bit.
Well, that brings up a really, really good point. Because I think that is one of the biggest myths, is that when you see a black belt, as you said, at a good school, they should have an understanding of it. But I'm going to say one of the biggest myths is there's a lot of black belts that get their belt based on natural talent and not an understanding of the move. And so when you see a black belt, you might be like, oh man, that's a really cool move. How'd you do that? And a lot of times they'll go, I just did. I just can do it. Is that where a black belt should be? Maybe, I don't know. Just because you can beat someone else up and you're a better quote-unquote fighter, does that make you a black belt? Or is it the understanding of the move that makes you a black belt? I think that's a big myth.
And even skill kind of comes to a little bit of, it's relative, because your other black belts are not as talented, then someone new, who's only been training 2-3 years, if they're at that same level, well, they're also now a black belt, and it becomes a bit of a cycle where the standard was low to start, so now the standard stays low. But iron sharpens iron at a school where your black belts are a higher tier, your new students have to strive for that level, and it'll make them better. If your top level students are all the way up here, my hands, up here right now, you can't see it, but then as your new students, they have to strive to that level. And as teachers, good teachers will also always say they want their students to be even better than them, so that standard should just be rising every time.
Well, and another myth of the black belt is that if any black belts are listening to this, you could see where his hand was. We have a sixth sense to be able to hear and see. No, I'm just kidding.
It's crazy that they don't tell you about this when you start, but when you get a black belt, you get like these sixth senses and like these mystic powers. It's really cool. Other people are missing out on this.
So this kind of brings up another topic of the myth of the black belt here that I want to get into is what are, and we'll go back and forth. That'll give us time to think. But I'll have you start. But what is a myth that you've heard either a student or a parent or someone have an expectation for what a black belt is that kind of falls into that realm, that like almost silly, almost mystic power, maybe not quite that extreme, but what is one of the myths that you have heard someone think, oh, you're a black belt, therefore this?
Well, there's the old like one hit punch or the one hit strike where you can take someone out in just one hit, or you can tap them in just the right spot and knock them out or kill them or something.
The dim mock.
Yeah. Something ridiculous that a black belt could punch you right over the heart and end you right there.
Yeah, I think it's funny because scientifically, yes, if someone had a traumatic impact to the right area, it could potentially be fatal to the right person. But the idea that a black belt can do that on a whim, at any point, directed in a fight or self-defense scenario, is outlandish. That is absurd amounts of accuracy and the right combination of things coming into play to make that happen.
My question for you then would be, when do you think we even practice this? Like, where did we get this skill that we were sure that, oh yeah, this is going to work every single time?
Yeah,
we're not going around knocking each other out on the weekends. Like, it's not what black belt class is for.
All those things that a black belt can do that one hit and kill someone. When would I get? You're right. When would they practice that? And how would they practice that? Legally?
I've thankfully never been in a situation where I've had to use my skill to that level.
I've knocked out many inanimate object, Wave Masters and the Bob the Versus bags. Sure, but yes, that is definitely one of those myths is there are those deadly arts, quote unquote. And again, if you're a black belt, you can see my quotes, but that's okay. But you can't legitimately practice that. Like you can't practice hitting someone so hard that it stops their heart, because that would require you hitting someone hard enough to see if you actually could stop their heart. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Nope. Doesn't work like that. Doesn't work like that.
All right. What's another kind of outlandish myth you've heard?
So I think one of the ones, I kind of mentioned this earlier, going back to the mental or the kind of integrity, honesty, and discipline, all those things which come with martial arts, is the idea that black belts can do no wrong. A black belt is always going to tell the truth. A black belt is always going to be the most humble person. A black belt is always going to have the utmost respect and standards. And while I wish that was true, it's simply not. I hate to say this, but there are black belts out there that are some of the most toxic people. And usually it stems from this idea that their style's the best or whatever. And we'll talk about that later. But black belts are people too. And so when you go to a school and you see a black belt, just because they're a black belt, you cannot assume that they are going to be the best, most humble, most respectful person. Most of them are. Most of them are great. But there are going to be those out there that are taking advantage of that might try to manipulate. We've had this happen with one of our students at a school recently, where it's just, you hear these stories and you're like, oh my gosh. And I think that this idea that black belts can do no wrong, no, we're people too. We make mistakes, and some of us are good people, some of us are not good people. I think that's a misconception that is, especially parents listening, should really consider. Get to know the person. Don't just look at their belt color.
It's one of the reasons I think humility has always been so big in kind of martial arts lore and legend, and why some of the best martial artists were considered very humble. Because again, as we said earlier, a new student, a white belt, is going to put a black belt up on this pedestal, and if you're not humble about that, that's just going to feed into that narcissism and that view of yourself, that you're going to end up believing the myth yourself that you're better than everyone else. So if you can't stay humble and keep yourself in check and always keep that growth mindset of wanting to learn and get better, then you're going to fall trapped to this. Because black belts are talented, you have a skill. Doesn't, again, necessarily make you a good person. It's just an indicator of your skill. But you can't let that become everything about you. It's one of our kind of mat chat topics we talk about with the kids at the start of class is earning respect. And something I've said multiple times in class is, just because I'm a black belt or just because you see someone wearing black belt does not mean I automatically deserve your respect. I still have to get up here, teach you, earn your respect. I have to be kind to you, help you out, coach you. So if I expect the student to earn my respect, I should expect the same from them in return. That I have to treat them the same way I want to be treated. That's respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those, if a black belt's out there and they're sparring a lower rank, and they get beat in a match or hit or submitted or whatever, they have to, you can't be mad. You have to congratulate that person. Like, wow, that was really good. I mean, they're going to be up on cloud 9 because they're like, oh my gosh, I beat a black belt. And if the black belt doesn't handle that well, is that really a black belt? What's another myth that you've heard? I've got one, but we're going back and forth here. What's another one? Hopefully you don't steal mine.
Here, I want to hear the one you have first, just so I don't steal it.
Okay. So one of the myths that I hear about being a black belt is, and I've mentioned this to you, everyone assumes that you're just going to beat them up. I always tell my students, do not wear your uniform out in public. They're here, they're in class, they're in their gi, or they've got their belt on, and then they're like, man, I got to go pick up something at the grocery store real quick on the way home. Change. Don't wear that out in public. It is this thing that when someone sees that, they immediately, oh man, that person can beat me up, or that person's going to beat me up, or they'll make those little like Bruce Lee noises, wah, out. And it just, as an actual black belt, I just roll my eyes.
One of our junior black belts, I was out at our recording a video of him last year for our Black Belt Week documentary, and we had a student roll by. You can hear this in the video. It wasn't a student, it was just some random kid or teenager drive by and see him out in his uniform, because we just filmed this in between classes, and was like yelling noises at him, like,
wah, yeah,
exactly. Mm-hmm. Said something like, oh look, it's a black belt, all this stuff. You can still hear it in the final video, but yeah,
it's this idea that I can't tell you how many times people, oh, you're a black belt. Oh, you don't beat me up. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to. It's this assumption that all we do is fight. All we do is just fight, and that's what we're gonna do. We just walk around, which is funny that people have this assumption that we're just gonna go around and fight everyone. Yet black belts are often viewed as the heroes in a lot of these, like media and stuff like that. So this misconception that, we practice self-defense, but a lot of it is also just the fitness, the endurance, the staying in shape. We move around so we can, keep up and have quick reflexes, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean that we're just going around looking for fights.
Here's the sad thing about being a black belt and teacher is that I do more push-ups in the week than, actually fighting. Too busy teaching other people to fight and working out with them that I'm not usually the one participating in the match.
Well, I also think that a lot of the times people do martial arts because if it's a kid, they have been bullied. If it's someone a little older, they did get in a fight. And so they learn all this stuff so that doesn't happen again. And then they get so good at avoiding it because they're confident that most black belts don't fight. Most of them got in their fights before they earned their black belt. Mm-hmm. Very rarely does a black belt actually get in a fight because we don't look for it. We know to avoid it. We know how dangerous a real fight could be. But most of the time a lot of people do martial arts because they already got in a fight.
I almost put more emphasis on, for a student going for black belt, on their awareness and their ability to handle a situation than their actual fighting. Because at their test, I know they're going to get a fight a lot, but they're going to be going up against the other black belts who have been doing this longer than them, or been black belts for years. Like, they're probably not going to win those matches. So I'd rather see how they handle it when things are looking rough. Are they able to stay aware throughout their test and time, to avoid these fights? That's what's important.
Well, and a lot of times, even if you are sparring or fighting or grappling, there are rules involved. Mm-hmm. Or there's an understanding of rules. There's gloves, there's gear, there's a mouthpiece. There's all these things for protection so that you can simulate without actually doing it. Because like you said, we can't actually practice gouging someone's eye out. Or doing that one punch kill. Like, you can't practice it.
We've tried to do more realistic fight sims, but there's always a limit to it. And even then, I can't remember the last time I did like a really realistic fight sim. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's hard to simulate that without it being an actual thing. It's just ramping up the intensity or giving more resistance on what you're doing. So this idea that black belts just go around looking for fights or fighting everyone they see, that's a myth. We don't do that. In fact, that's the one thing we probably do the least amount of, is actually go out and fight.
I'll give you one more myth kind of off of that, is that black belts are, just their whole life is about martial arts and, training and fighting or whatever, which I'll say, sometimes is the case. So, and I think maybe part of the reason where that myth comes from, there will be some black belts you meet who that's kind of where they give all their attention, the only thing they do. And I think that's less a thing about martial arts and more just kind of a general human trait, is putting all your time and effort into one thing can sometimes be a bit too much. You got to be able to pull back and have a life outside of kind of your job or your main hobby or your main interest. You got to be able to divide your attention, be healthy with that. Anyone who just works 24/7 is not going to be happy, or they're going to burn out quicker. You have to be able to appreciate what you do by having time off from it as well.
Well, and I think another that feeds into a similar myth here is that most black belts have a job. We are fortunate enough to teach. But even then, like you already mentioned, most of the time we're teaching, we're not training 24/7. We have dedicated black belt classes and things for our own training, and we like to get out there and train as much as we can, but a lot of our time is teaching. We're not just out there doing martial arts 24/7. If that's all I did, no one would ever learn from me. And even black belts, that's not their thing. They have another job. They're not out. They can't train 24/7. Training and fighting and beating stuff up doesn't pay the bills.
Of our 21 black belts, I'm doing the number in my head right now, I think only 4 of them full-time job or their only job is martial arts and teaching. The other ones all have some sort of other job or are young enough they're still in school. And even of those 4, you and I also do a lot of more on the business side of things as well. So even then we have some, it's still martial arts adjacent, but some non-mat related duties as well. So that's most of our black belts. They have either another job or they don't even teach. The black belt's just something they do in their own time, their free time.
Right. And I think that's a big misconception, is that people think, oh, if, black belt is dedicating their entire life to training and go out and doing cage matches and things like that. There are some people that's their goal, but that has to be their goal. And that can't be a goal for everyone, because some people, they just don't have the time to put into that. If you have someone that has all their bills paid and miraculously is able to just train 24/7, then yeah, they're probably going to go out there and win a lot. But the average person has a job. They've got bills to pay. Their body can't physically keep training that because they have other things and obligations they have to do. And so a black belt is not someone who spends their entirety of their day just doing martial arts. Some people do it as a hobby. Some people have other hobbies they do on top of that. That's okay. That's what keeps us human. That's what keeps us sane. And so this idea that a black belt is always training, not the case.
As we are kind of talking about black belts and what defines a black belt, you do bring up the word, again, hobby, and that just gets me thinking a little bit, because we've had conversations about this recently, can getting a black belt be a hobby? And how do you really define hobby versus, a lifestyle versus a commitment versus, just education? Can a black belt just be kind of a side thing, a hobby?
I think that it can, with a few caveats. And I've always said this. You can get so far in martial arts as a hobby, but at some point, you're going to have to, as we talked about, dedicate. It doesn't have to be full-time. It doesn't have to be for the rest of your life. But there's going to have to come a decision where you have to decide, okay, this is what I want. I'm going to dedicate the next year, 2 years, to this goal. I've gotten so far as a hobby, but I need to take this time to dedicate to get that done. Just like in school, just like in college, if you really want that doctorate, that master's, you've got to dedicate to get it. It no longer can be just a side thing you do. After that, and I think this is why a lot of people do quit at black belt, another myth, I don't know if this is really a myth, I think most people probably agree, but yes, if you're a black belt, it doesn't mean that you are going to continue your training. A lot of black belts get it and leave.
I keep using the phrase "are active black belts" because we have had more people earn their black belt and leave. Well, I think a couple still train elsewhere because they've moved. Right. Most of those people just do not train anymore.
Mm-hmm. And so a black belt, there is a difference between a black belt who continues their training and then someone who's, I got a black belt 10 years ago and stopped training. Well, they're probably not going to be as good as they were. So I think that, could you do it as a hobby? Sure. Is there going to be a period of time, couple years, where you had to dedicate to that one thing to get it? Yes. We would love it if you kept training after that. And I think that once you get it, if you continue to train as a hobby just to upkeep, that's fine. In fact, we have some black belts that I expected to leave that do that. They come in, they're not hardcore training, but we see them once a week just to kind of upkeep their training. Fine. Continue it. It's like riding a bike, go out and cycle every now and then.
Is there any other kind of, when we're talking about black belts, not even myths, but just things you've seen with black belts, and maybe things that are actually you have seen in other black belts that maybe you don't necessarily agree with that approach of being a black belt, or you don't really like the way that black belt presents themselves, without, you don't have to attack anyone in particular, but just kind of some common tropes you've seen black belts fall into?
I would say that the most common trope, sadly, is probably a little bit of arrogance. I see a lot of black belts that are very humble and very open and willing to learn other things, and then I see a lot of black belts that are very arrogant and, I'm a black belt, I can do this, I don't need that other training, I don't need that.
Are you saying I should stop starting every class with, I can totally beat up Mr. Liston guys, that chump over there, he can never beat me?
Oh no, keep saying that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, by all means, keep telling
that's
everyone.
That's how I start every class, so I just want to make sure that's good still.
That'll build excitement for the kids and the students wanting to see us fight.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have such high hopes, because of everything you've told them. No, I think, but I do think that is unfortunately one of those kind of negative tropes that I think happens is, I'm a 4th degree in Taekwondo, I'm a brown belt in Nishinryu Karate, I'm purple belt in Jiu-Jitsu at the time of this recording, I've done boxing, I've done kickboxing. I will never claim that I can just beat anyone up, because I also realize that, A, the more arrogant I am, the more likely karma's going to come back and bite me, and I'm going to get clocked and knocked out within the first few seconds because of that. Because that's life. But again, I'm not looking to do that. I'm not looking to prove anything. I do this for me because I love doing it. And I think that is what a lot of black belts will tell you is, the other benefits outside of that. So if a black belt is very arrogant and is more concerned with all their trophies, it's probably not a black belt that I would want to work with.
And you can see that trope also kind of with black belts who become almost a figurehead, often teachers who, are an instructor at a dojo, who they kind of get to the point where they have teachers underneath them, and then they don't even train anymore. So it's like we said, they haven't actually trained in 10 years. They're not active in their training, but they're still enough involved, or they're kind of this figurehead that they put themselves above everyone. They got all these teachers under them. But really, they're not that good at it anymore because they're either rusty or, it was never really something important to them. It was, again, more just the arrogance of looking like they're the top at this, looking like a master.
Right. And one would hope that kind of arrogance would be caught early on and they would never make it there. But, there was probably a time when they were really good and very humble, and then maybe based on these myths and everyone looking at them with this awe kind of filled them, as you mentioned earlier, they start to believe it. They're like, oh man, I am the best. I am a master. I can do all these things. I do have magical sixth sense powers that allow me to predict someone's motions before they ever even happen, or whatever strange case there may be. They probably started to believe it if enough people thought they could do it. That's why I think it's dangerous to put someone on that kind of a pedestal.
Ultimately, it's just a belt. It's a piece of fabric made of black. It comes into, the skill of the person, the character of the person, their experiences. That's what makes them a black belt, not the fabric. Just this morning before I left to come here, I was watching a cartoon, and the character just bought a gi with a black belt, and for the whole episode was just wearing a black belt. The whole joke though was they've never even done martial arts before, that they were just wearing it as pretty much a costume. It was just
right, yeah,
costume they bought at a party shop. If you want to, you can go on any martial arts retail wholesale website and buy a black belt for $20. Does it even cost that much?
Yeah, I think the one of my coaches said that one of the biggest things they see is that people give them too much credit.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever they're doing a match, the person assumes you're going to be able to beat me up, so they just avoid them the whole time. And they're like, no, y'all give me too much credit.
Oh, yeah. I've even told other students before that, you just have to be good enough sometimes to make your opponent fear you a little bit, and that's half the battle. People think I'm better.
Yeah.
People have seen me kick a lot in matches before, so they're just afraid of my legs now. So I don't even necessarily have to kick them a whole lot. They just try to stay away from them just because they think I can hit them.
Right. It's that, oh man, they're so good. And it's like, no, you're giving us too much credit. Maybe I get you, maybe you get me. Yeah, it happens. And I think that the other thing, because you mentioned someone, in this cartoon just bought a black belt. Okay, well, if you come in and you're wearing a black belt, I will expect a level of proficiency from you. Sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. So if you don't feel comfortable wearing it, don't wear it. And don't, this is kind of, it's not really a myth, but I want to end on this kind of funny thing that happens. People view this as the belt, and so a lot of times, I'm sure you've heard this, someone to do something, they'll be like, oh, well, you should give me that black belt. And at first I was...
a couple times.
Yeah. When I first heard that, I was like, oh no, you're not ready. And I kind of changed my thought process to, sure, I'll go grab you a black belt. You can wear it, but then I'm going to spar you at that level. And that usually quickly is like, oh, because they have this idea of like, oh my goodness. Well, if you're not ready, don't put yourself in that situation. I love putting on my white belts. I love going to judo class and wearing a white belt because the expectation's so low.
And that's another thing, you're a black belt and a style. We said at the start of the episode, there's so many martial arts styles out there. Some are, just copies of each other when you get down to it. Other ones are far different. If you got a black belt in Taekwondo, you don't have a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. You're not going to be good at that right away. Same if you have a black belt in Judo, doesn't mean you're going to be great at kickboxing right away.
Right. So, it's a very specific skill set. And I think that's another myth, is that a black belt does not mean that you're great at all martial arts. It usually means you're good at one area of your martial art training, whatever style that is and whatever rank that is. You might be good at kicking, punching, grappling, throwing, whatever it is. It's that one area.
So are you saying if I have 2 first-degree black belts, that makes me a second-degree? Or is it the opposite? If I'm a second-degree black belt, I have 2 different black belts. How's this work?
Honestly, I think it's more impressive to have multiple belts in multiple styles than be a 8th degree in one. But I think that might be another topic. We'll delve more into some of those things in future episodes. So if you guys enjoy hearing us ramble on, then post some comments, post some questions for our Q&A. We're keeping up with those. But keep on listening. You can get us anywhere you get your podcasts. Thank you all so much. And hopefully the next time you see a black belt, you go up, shake their hand, and treat them as a human being.
Let us know what you want to hear us talk about next time. And for now, keep kicking
for a living.